a special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
A special session has been held on Thursday, August the 31st, 2017 at 5:00 p.m. in the 5th floor conference room for an economic development and finance TIF update and incentive policy. Roll call. Johnson. Here. Kane. Here. Markley. Here. Walters. Here. Philbrook. Here. Bynum. Here. Walker. Here. Townsend. McKiernan.
Here.
Ugia. Holland.
Here. Tonight we have a special session on tax increment financing, and I think this has two purposes. One, it gives the public a chance to understand it better, and this is going to be a kind of a lengthy program, but this is an opportunity for all of us. I get a lot of questions out there on the road about tax increment financing and what it is and what it does and how much we've used it and when we use it. And this is going to be an excellent presentation to be able to point people back to. So I think it's going to be beneficial for the public. It's also going to be beneficial for us as policymakers as we move forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bach.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioners, it's always good to set a high standard when we come out, staff, that the mayor's already rated this as excellent. So you guys got to perform tonight. Yeah, as the mayor said, this is to really talk about tax increment financing, or TIF as it's more commonly referred to. Our objective this evening is to talk about what is TIF, what it is from a policy perspective, I guess how the program is utilized in our community. We have built within this presentation our existing TIF projects, so it gives you a feel for it. And I think one thing about TIF to note is there's kind of this perception that we're rolling out a lot of TIFs, that we're always doing TIFs. Well, this is everything that's active today. And if you look at them, we wouldn't show that we're doing one a year. So the objective here is to go through, show how they're performing. And we've done this in previous years we've gone to, but there's a clear breakdown in between ones that we did years ago regarding residential areas. And when you see that in their performance or lack of versus the commercial projects, which have performed at a different level, and that'll be demonstrated in the presentation tonight. As the mayor said, this is a fairly lengthy presentation. So while I always like to get into things, I really hope we don't stop a lot on projects that we did a TIF on 12 years ago and say it's residential, and I haven't done one like that, in the last decade or anything, that to overanalyze things that we're not doing anymore, unless we, kind of see how they're all performing before we break down each individual project might help us try to get through it some. But I realize there'll be a lot of questions and things as we go through it, but we would like to try to move along through it, because we probably, this takes a while to get through. And then I think as we ask our questions, it's really to see if there's areas to work on and go to, and then that's the opportunity for us to then make it back down to the committee level, or even come back to a different session if we wanted to work on revisions to the policy. So it's not really our intent that we see revisions, it's more of what we need to dig into or what areas of concern we have about this, and maybe there's some additional work to do from there. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to staff. Kathleen Von Atchen, our Chief Financial Officer, and her staff has put together a lot of information along with John Stevens from Economic Development. So with that, Kathleen.
Thank you, Doug. I did want to introduce Elise Villarreal, who is our newly appointed Capital Finance Coordinator. and she did a great deal of work on this presentation, so I very much appreciate all her effort. Also, I'd like to introduce Debbie Johnsher, my Deputy CFO, and then we also have John Stevens, the Interim Economic Development Director. Now, how we're going to do this is we're going to provide an update on each TIF chronologically, and we're only going to talk about TIF districts. We're not going to include STAR districts tonight, in the interest of trying to condense our presentation. So maybe in the future we can talk about STAR districts. Now, TIF is not the only economic development tool available to us, but it is the major one. So just keep that in mind. You might have heard of some other economic development initiative that was undertaken, and you're kind of wondering why it's not in this presentation. It's because it's not a TIF, that's why. So what we're going to start out with is a brief overview of how tax increment financing works. Debbie's going to lead that discussion, and then after that, we're going to walk you through each and every one of the TIF districts. There are 19 TIF districts that are active, but 4 of them are don't have project plans, or they haven't started, or they're very young. So we won't really be touching on those too much. And then following that discussion of each district, then we're going to have John talk and provide an overview of the current tax abatement policy, and then we'll finally get to hopefully about 45 minutes of your questions and discussions on economic development. So, all right. So tax increment financing. And I'm going to lead this, we're going to have Debbie Johnsher take this from here.
Good evening. I'm going to start out with just a brief overview of the TIF process and some of the decisions that go into setting up a TIF district. And then I'll turn it over to Kathleen, and we'll go through the active districts and then a summary at the end. So we'll start with the TIF overview. What is tax increment financing? That's a public financing tool that is used for redevelopment. It's the capture of incremental taxes from new development and application of that money to assist or stimulate that development. What that means is we take the increment, the increased tax revenue, and apply it toward eligible project costs. Why use TIF? TIF encourages development in areas that may not have been developed without the use of public investment. Does it make our community better? Yes, we have a long-term vision to create a value within the community, and redevelopment typically brings new jobs. It improves community resources and amenities, encourages additional private investment in addition to the original investment, and diversifies and strengthens our tax base. There's both direct and indirect impacts when using TIF. The creation of jobs is a big one. If it's a commercial development, it could bring new jobs to the community. It could also be retention or movement of existing jobs and its future growth of our tax base. Some of the indirect impacts from TIF financing: property taxes for new family residents. If it's a residential development, then it would stimulate new property tax revenue. However, if it's a commercial development bringing new jobs to our community, then we could have some of those people relocate to our community and also have additional property tax revenue. Earnings taxes on payroll is not something that applies to our community. If you have a community such as Kansas City, Missouri that has an earnings tax, bringing in new jobs to that community would create additional taxes that could be used as additional revenue to supplement the project. Sales taxes on local spending. Development brings new jobs bring people spend money in our community, and that relates to increased sales tax revenue. TIFs can be created in one of two ways. Developer can initiate the TIF process. If they have an interest in developing a certain area within the community, they can come to the city and start the process. The city can also initiate a TIF district if they have an underdeveloped area or an area they want to increase interest in. They could create a district and then hopefully entice developers with interest in that area. These are the eligible areas that a TIF district can be created. In our community, we only use the top two. All of our TIF districts are either in areas designated as blight or pre-1992 enterprise zones. This graph here shows back in August of 1991, a resolution was passed that designated the shaded areas as enterprise zones. And later on, I'll show you a percentage of how many TIF districts are in the enterprise zones. Requirements for creation of a redevelopment district. One, it has to be in one of those eligible areas, has to be defined by the city. Each TIF district, they have to determine the number of project areas, and each project area has its own 20-year clock. So the 20-year clock does not start when the TIF district is created. It starts with the approval of a redevelopment plan within each project area. Also, school districts have the right to veto a redevelopment district project. When would you use TIF dollars? As I said earlier, if redevelopment is unlikely to occur in an area without public investment, this would be a tool that could be used. Obviously, if a project can generate reasonable profit on its own, then you would not want to use TIF dollars, because then those additional dollars would be allocated to the project instead of coming back to the taxing entities. This is a sample timeline of creating a redevelopment district and also a redevelopment plan. As you can see, it takes about 5 months if everything is on track. Because you have to hold a public hearing, you have to send notices to the property owners within the district, as well as send notice to all the taxing districts. So it takes about 5 months. While all of this is occurring, there are also other elements of the TIF that are being considered, such as, does the developer have all of his private financing in order to complete the project? We may have feasibility studies going on to ensure that the project can perform, and if there's debt issued, to be able to pay back the debt. Are there any changes in any of the property or sales tax rates, and does the developer have any tenants committed to the project? Other decisions are who, what, and how much. Who's included? City and county would be included. The school district is included. However, the first 20 mills of a school district levy are exempt from the TIF calculation. Also, the state's 1.5 mills are also exempt. On the next slide, I'm going to provide an example of how we calculate TIF increment, and you'll be able to see that clearer. What can be included? Real estate property taxes, sales tax, both sales and use tax can be pledged, as well as transient guest tax and other special taxes, such as CIDs, community improvement districts, and transportation development districts. We can choose to include 100% of the increment to go toward the project, or we can also set a smaller percentage or set a cap, so that once if a cap is set, once the reimbursement reaches that level, then all of the remaining tax revenue starts coming back to the different taxing entities. So this is the example we're going to use. Before development, we have a property that has an assessed value of $1,000. And for this example, I'm going to say that we rounded all the numbers just to make them even. So for this example, we're going to assume that $1,000 of assessed value brings in tax revenue of $100. So that $100 becomes the base. When a tax district is created and the base is defined, that number stays constant. So now after development, the same property is now worth $1 million. We're going to assume no change in the mill levy. Our $1,000 of assessed value still brings in $100. But now, because the assessed value is $1 million, we're bringing in tax revenue of $100,000. So we've got $100,000 of revenue coming in for the project. when we calculate the increment, the first thing we have to do is take off the base, because the base remains constant, and the base comes back to all the taxing entities. Next, we want to subtract off the school district's 20 mills and the state's 1.5 mills. So that leaves a remaining $78,400 of property tax increment that's eligible to be applied to the project. Now, as I said earlier, they can choose to put the entire increment to the project, or you can set a cap as to how much you actually want to include. As assessed value changes, the base never changes, it always stays the same, but the school district, the state amount, and the increment will all change according to what the assessed value is set at. If the assessed value is higher than $1 million, then all of these numbers would be higher. So this is just a simplified example of how you would calculate that. They want to do a slide on the effect on the school districts. When we had the property that was undeveloped and the base was set at 100, the school district, the first 20 mills that are exempt from the TIF calculation goes back to the school district. So before it was developed, the school district was receiving $20. After development, that amount increased to $20,000. So that's an immediate impact to the school district after development, which is a pretty positive impact if the development occurs in the school district. Funding methods, pay as you go. This would be where the developer finances the entire project, and then expenses are reimbursed as increment is received. Special revenue bonds can be issued by the unified government. We could have a limited obligation, or if the project can't support itself in the beginning to issue bonds, the UG could provide an annual appropriation until the project gets going, and then the bonds could be refinanced to remove that annual appropriation. The third type, full faith and credit, is actually our general obligation bonds. We did have a note on here that once a TIF, the outstanding amount of TIF bonds exceeds 3% of assessed value of the county, then we have to count that, we have to include that in our calculation for the debt limit. So what can you finance with TIF revenues? Land acquisition and site preparation, parking and landscaping, pretty much all public infrastructure is eligible for TIF costs. Streets, curbs, sidewalks, utilities, parking garages. The only thing that is not eligible for TIF revenues is the private buildings, buildings owned by the developer. And this is the last slide before we go on to the districts. This is just a cap of several different graphs that highlight the TIF districts. I'll start with the one, the upper left. How many districts? As Kathleen said, we have 19 TIF districts. Currently, 13 have debt issued on them and 6 do not. All of the TIFs are in 2 of the eligible zones. 47% of our TIFs are in enterprise zones. 53% are in areas designated as blight. We have both commercial, residential, and mixed-use development. Some have debt, some do not. We also have 7 districts that have other revenue sources other than property tax pledged to them. We have 5 districts that have sales taxes pledged, and 2 districts that have transient guest taxes. The middle graph on the bottom shows how they're financed. The majority of them are financed with the majority of the ones that have debt are financed with general obligation bonds. We have a few special revenues and pay as you go. And then, as Kathleen mentioned, we do have a couple of districts that do not have an active redevelopment plan. We have those listed in the box to the right: 38th and Leavenworth Road, 57th and State, Bethany, East Parallel. Midtown does have debt issued, but there is no redevelopment plan. So these projects do have districts, but there's no plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen. Or Elise.
No.
Oh, Kathleen.
So we're going to talk about each of the districts, and Elise and I are going to tag team each other. I'm going to start out. So as you know, as I mentioned before, we decided to organize these based on how old the district is. So the first one is Peregrine Falcon. It's a residential tax increment financing district. It's in a blighted zone. It has 5 project areas. It is partially built, and this one is backed by, the debt service is backed by property tax, which is was issued under a general obligation bond. And by the way, that district is located on Quindaro and 7th, around there. The district was formed in 1997, and the plan was approved in that same year. Then the old district was abolished and a new one was created in 2005. So there's the new one. You can see that it had 5 project areas there. Project area, yeah, go ahead. And there's, it's expected to be completed, or the project plan is completed in 2025. So on each of these projects, we.
1 second, we had a quick question on that. I just want to make sure. Can you turn your microphone on, please?
Did you say that the only one we have is section 5 now? The other ones were? I'm kind of confused on the project areas. You've got 5 project areas. And so did you say that something was abolished and started something new? I heard that, but I wasn't sure what it was.
Right, so the original district was actually approved in 1997, but then they had some issues with a lawsuit, I believe, from the Wyandotte Nation. And so that halted progress in, I think, a bunch of different TIF districts. And so they, in 2005, they decided the clock was already running, we better abolish this district and restart again. That way they have the life of the 20
But it's still the same areas.
It's still the same area, and then,
So-
yeah.
Okay.
So how this works is, you form a district, and then within the district, as a subset, there are project areas within the district. So now, the first district is no longer in place. We now have a new district, of which they sectioned up into 5 project areas. That's what I was saying. Yeah, so the plan for this district was originally to build 129 single-family homes ranging from 145,000 to 200,000, 21 townhomes ranging from 110 to 135,000, to build a community center and to rehab 40 existing homes. So. Now, I did want to mention over here on the right-hand side, you're going to see a checklist, and we've provided this checklist for each of our districts, and this is basically how we're measuring the performance of each of these districts. That's whether the district's revenues covered its expenses, whether the payoff was on schedule, whether the district improved the community resources or amenities, whether or not the private investment promised in the project plan was achieved, and then finally, did the project or the district diversify and strengthen the tax base. So as we talk through these, we're going to, kind of provide our rendering of how we performed on each of these districts. Peregrine Falcon, unfortunately, did not successfully achieve in building all of the homes that they had promised, and as a result, the debt service is exceeding the amount of property tax revenue that's being collected. So the revenue is not covered. In fact, the payoff schedule, which is expected, the debt service is expected to end in 2025. That between the amount of fund balance that is net in a deficit position of 455, plus a cost remaining on the debt service of 333. This residential tax increment financing district that was formed many years ago has a deficit of $788,000. So it's not paying off. It's not, the revenue and the expenses are not equaling each other. So now here, project area 1, as in a little bit more detail. They planned for 30 single-family homes. There's the breakout, 9 townhomes, community center, and 9 existing home rehabs. There's a number of other homes that they promised. Ultimately, and I could go through each one, I did want to mention actually in your handout that I missed a correction that we planned to do, and actually the handout doesn't match what is on the screen. So what's on the screen is the accurate number, just so you know. But ultimately, only 5 homes were built. So only in project area 1. So, you know, project area 2 through 5 still do not have any develop on them. So it didn't, a majority of the private investment was not completed, and also the tax base was not diversified. So this is an example of that residential, you know, tax increment financing district that no longer is a policy or an initiative that we pursue any longer, because it is a risky endeavor to use tax increment financing as a tool for residential development. There are other tools that can be utilized. So. Right.
Okay. Our next district is Northeast Armourdale. It's a commercial district that's located in an enterprise zone. It has just one project area. It's been fully built, and it was backed by property tax revenue that was included in a GO issue. So this district was approved in 1999 along with a plan, and they even amended the plan. And then a second amendment occurred in 2002, which increased and we expect completion for this project in 2017. So if we look at this graph, which shows the revenue, which is the orange line, and the expenditure, which is the yellow, it looks a little crazy because some of there's some mountains and some hills and some peaks. But all in all, the fund balance is accumulating. The revenue has been covering the expense for this project. And we actually anticipate it to pay off on schedule. In 2019, which is when the plan ends, if we continued all the way, we would have a surplus of $312,000. But with it paying off early, we will most likely come to you and discuss terminating the TIF district so that the revenue can flow through to the taxing jurisdictions. As far as private investment goes for this district, the building was built and it's complete, and we've seen an increase in the assessed value, and so it has strengthened our tax base.
So Melrose Business Park is a commercial property. It was built in an enterprise, or it is within an enterprise zone. It has 3 project areas within it. One of the project areas is partially built, and the funding or source is a general obligation bond backed by property tax revenue. And the district itself is located east of 635 on 47th on the west, and Gibbs Road on the south, around there. So it consists of 49-acre parcel of land to be used as an industrial park, of which 7 or more industrial buildings were planned in the plan, totaling 424,000 square feet. Currently, what we know is that there's 2 buildings currently there, and so one of them is Frito-Lay, and the other one is the Progressive Call Center, which, or in the past it was the Progressive Call Center. So she's showing pictures of it. No, it's all good. So this This district is performing quite well. The revenues and the expenses are covering each other on an annual basis. And you can see there that the orange line there at the bottom is the revenue number, and the line below it, beginning in 2011, is the yellow line, which is the debt service number. So you can see that's below it. That's a good thing, right? Yep. So the debt service didn't really kick in or start until a good, I don't know, 6-7 years after we were starting to collect that revenue. And that's why annually, you know, we weren't spending that money on debt service, so it kind of built up a fund balance, and that fund balance continues to grow as the revenues expected to exceed the debt service. So that's a good thing. We expect that the payoff, we don't expect it to pay off early, and we don't expect it to be on schedule and the reason is because, you know, the plan was that the infrastructure or the project costs or the investment was sized for 7 buildings, not 2. So if we can, you know, generate additional development and put in place those additional 5 buildings, this project area will definitely pay itself off. And not only that, if the development occurs in project area 2 rather than 1, then we would be able to reset that 20-year clock, and then we would be able to collect and dedicate those revenues to the project. So 2 buildings have been successfully completed. So the private investment marginally is being accomplished at the 29% of the total number of buildings. And in terms of diversified and strengthening the tax base, the assessed value of the area has improved from $41,000 before the development to $1.6 million after the development. So that's good. That's very positive.
All right, our next district is Mission Cliffs and then Rainbow Park, which I'll discuss. It's a residential district in a blighted area with one project area, fully built out now, and it's property tax based, and it included in a GO issue. So Mission Cliffs, the district was approved in 2003 along with a plan, and then once they got into it, they decided further what they were going to do for the whole area, and they talked with council, and it was decided that it'd be better to split the Mission Cliffs district into 2 different districts. And so Rainbow Park was formed, and then our next district, Mission Cliffs 2, which Kathleen will talk about, was formed in 2005. And so the plan was, the original plan was 66 townhomes and the development of 26 single-family homes, where the first phase was 10 single-family homes between Lloyd and Minnie. And that's what the Rainbow Park district ended up being, was that first phase, the 10 single-family homes. And so we're anticipating completion in 2019 for this district. Revenue has been covering the debt service needs for this area, and a fund balance has been accumulating. And so we are anticipating this district to pay off a little early in 2019, and it should have a little bit of a surplus to go along with it. The 10 homes have been constructed, and assessed value has increased. And the reason that it's not quite as impressive as the other, there's not as much yellow, which is the increment, it's because there were existing homes in that area before, so we were getting some revenue there.
Right, so continuing with Mission Cliffs 2, it's also a residential district in a blighted area. There are 2 project areas, and it's partially built, and the revenue pledge is property tax, and it has a general fund, general obligation backing. It's located on Dixon Road at west and Lake Avenue on the south, near the district that Elise just spoke of. It began in 2005 as a new district, and the project plan A was approved. In 2000B, Project Plan B was approved. And then the next year, in 2009, A was amended. So the anticipated completion of this project area is in 2028. And as you can see, the revenues are not covering the expenses. And we have attributed that to basically the fact that not all of the homes were built that we expected. Or perhaps, what was it again? Yeah, okay. And the reason is that project area A, although 100% complete, which I think we'll go to that next, you'll see that on the next slide that, it's 100% complete, but project area B, nothing happened there. So the fund balances continue to come into a deficit position of 1.7 million. The debt service continues past the project area period of 2027, and that totals 650,000. And so that provides a net deficit of 2.3 million for this project area, or for this district. So project area A, which was completed, has 30 single-family homes and 47 townhomes. And project area B was planned to have 31 townhomes, but those didn't come to pass, or not yet anyhow. The assessed value, so private investment marginally was achieved, but it would have been achieved had project area B completed. The assessed value improved, and that's right. Project area improved. It grew by $791,000.
Our next district is St. Peter's Waterway, which is a residential district in a blighted neighborhood, or blighted area, with one project area, and it's been partially built, and only property tax has been pledged, and it's incorporated into a debt issue, geo-debt issue. So this project was essentially an infill redevelopment encompassing 57 acres, and this project occurred in partnership with the Community Housing of Wyandotte County, and I think it was, it targeted vacant and tax delinquent and dilapidated properties. Currently, we're anticipating completion in 2025. So St. Peter's Waterway, the revenue has not been covering the amount that was bonded, the costs that were incurred on the project. So we're showing a negative fund balance currently and anticipating that to continue through the rest of the TIF, should everything stay the same. And so we are not anticipating it to complete on schedule, and we are anticipating a deficit of about 3.5 million. We can continue using the revenues that we collect in the area to help service this as well, although it might take a while. Oh, and I did want to say the reasons for this could be, it was noted in that there were adverse site conditions that made this a pretty costly project. They had to remove buried foundations, they had to replace outdated sewers, replat outdated subdivision plats, demolish existing site improvements that had deteriorated. So it raised the cost for this project. But they've completed 70 homes, which is about half of the plan, and there has been an increase in assessed value. It just hasn't been enough to cover the expenses.
Next project is Escalade Heights. It's a residential project located between Parallel Parkway and State Avenue on Meadowlark Lane. It's located in an enterprise zone, and it has 3 project areas. 2 are fully built, and it's backed with property tax revenues. The district was created in 2004. In 2005, there was a project plan approved for project areas A and B, And in 2008, a project plan was approved for Area C. Project Area A has an apartment complex, and it also included any street, sidewalk, and sewer work, infrastructure work that was needed for the apartment complex. Project Area B was a single-family residential subdivision. Originally, 68 homes were scheduled. However, after the first 5 were built, development stopped. In 2013, we removed portions of B from the plan, and a substitution agreement was signed. And at that time, after that, there were additional single-family homes built in that area. Project Area C was slated for 47 new single-family homes. However, that area was sold to the school district, and now there is a ball field on that project area. Currently, the current agreement to the developer is a pay-as-you-go agreement. We have a reimbursement cost of $815,000. As of this year, we've paid back almost half of that amount. So once the full cap amount has been paid back, those revenues will start coming back to the taxing entities. I guess this shows the private investment. I guess I talked a lot of places. Project Area A was a 138-unit apartment complex, and Project Area B is a 16 family homes now. Currently has 16 family homes. So the base was before development was $6,178, and now the assessed value is almost $739,000.
And the next district is Prescott Plaza, which is located off of I-70 and 18th Street, where the Sunfresh and the other retail is. It's a commercial development in one of our blighted areas with a single project area. It's fully built, and it has both property and sales tax backing the project. So this district was approved in 2005. The plan was approved the following year in 2006. And then the district was expanded a little bit. So I do have a little caveat. It's not necessarily fully built because I don't think that there's anything on that little expansion. And we're anticipating completion in 2025 for this district. So revenue has been covering the expense and of the debt service, and a fund balance has been building. In 2025, when the TIF ends, we should have surplus, and so I believe that it's anticipated to complete that year, and that final year is what gives us the surplus. That we're not expecting it to complete earlier than that. And then there's quite a few amenities out in the community now that weren't there previously. Before it was a truck stop, and now we have not only a gas station, but we have a anchor grocery store along with lots of retail and restaurants, and a few banks, and so there has been quite a bit of private investment in the area. And so before it was generating 381,000. That's the base, and now it's up by 2.3 million to 2.7 million total in assessed value.
All right, I-70 in Armstrong is off of I-70 on the north and 670 on the east, around the Union Pacific Railroad yard. It's a commercial TIF district. It is in an enterprise zone, has one project area, it's fully built, and the property tax is backing the revenue pledge with the general obligation backing. So basically, what is being constructed, or what was constructed, is a 150,000 square foot industrial building. The district was approved in 2006. The plan, at that same year, the plan was approved, and then the plan was amended 3 years later. We anticipate the district to be completed in 2026. Fund balance has been growing and is anticipated to continue to grow in this project area, so revenues are covering expenses. At the end of the project area, there's a slight deficit that we're projecting of 127,000. That's because at the end of 2026, we expect a fund balance of 770,000, and the costs remaining are 897,000. So if there's a little bit more development in this area, and if revenues or assessed value are greater than what we anticipated in the future, which we built in a 2% increase, if it's slightly different than that, this project area will come out even. So it's 100% completed. We did construct that 150,000 square foot industrial park. So the private investment that was planned was achieved, and it has diversified and strengthened the tax base by improving our assessed value by $1 million.
Plaza at the Speedway is a commercial district in an enterprise zone. It just has one project area, and we're showing it being fully built out with property and sales tax being pledged. So this district was created in 2006 along with a plan, and we're anticipating a completion of 2027. What's built out here, in the plan, what was planned to be built and what is built is a first-class retail shopping center. It consists of 700,000 square feet of building space, including a major general merchandising store with a full-service grocery department, Kohl's, and other retail. They also erected and maintain a berm buffer between the residential subdivisions that are to the north and to the east. So Plaza at the Speedway does not have any general obligation backing like some of the others that we've talked about. Instead, it has special revenue bonds, and they're structured a little bit differently. So what's pledged to them are, in 2012, 88% of the incremental sales tax was pledged, where the UG was receiving 12%. And then that was changed from 2013 to 2016, where the UG began receiving 16% of the sales tax in the area. And then with the anticipation of the payoff of the STAR bonds, a provision that was negotiated in that agreement was that the development could then start receiving more, and so from 2017 on, now we are receiving 6.5% of the sales. And any excess revenues above the debt service are split 50% to the developer, which is used for super sinking the bonds, and then 50% to the UG. And then also real property taxes are pledged, and it's only 10 years for each parcel instead of the full 20. And so, for example, Walmart and Kohl's and Chick-fil-A are scheduled to come off in 2019. Their revenue will no longer be pledged toward the repayment of the bonds. Instead, it will come to the general funds. And each 10-year, so if a parcel is not developed until later on, because that's what starts when a parcel is developed, that's what starts that 10-year clock. If they're not developed until later, we're not extending the pledge beyond December 31st of 2024. And so revenues have been covering the expenses. We do anticipate to complete on schedule. Any revenues that come in go to pay it off, and there's been a substantial amount of development out there, private investment. we had noted that this was fully built out, but there are pad sites open, so we're noting it as 67%. And then there's been a substantial increase in assessed value, so we went from 200,000 up to 13 million.
So there's only 2 districts left. The first one is the next one is 39th and Rainbow, and the last one's Metropolitan Avenue. So there's 3? Oh, there's Strawberry Hill too. All right, 3. But we're almost there. So 39th and Rainbow, commercial property in the blighted zone. There's 4 project areas. 2 are fully built out, and the revenues backing the project are property tax, sales tax, and transient guest tax. This project is near the KU Medical Center off of Rainbow Boulevard on the east and 40th Avenue on the south. It's the developer was Lane 4. It was first approved in 2009. The plan was then approved in 2011, and we anticipate the project to be completed in 2030. And then this slide, because Elise put this together, I'm going to let her walk us through it.
Right, so this is another project that's not included in a GO issue. It has special revenue bonds helping to finance it. And so there are certain, again, it's structured differently to where the revenues that are able to be used earlier to help pay down because they're term bonds rather than set debt service schedule. So the revenues that are being collected are and pledged are 88.55% of the city's 1%, the county, the UG's portion of the county 1%, and the UG's portion of the transient guest tax. But not all of it. We didn't pledge 100%, so the UG is receiving benefit from this area. So we're getting that 11.45%. And then the incremental real property taxes, the first 12 years were pledged at 100%, but then as the project, because the bonds, since the revenue is being used to pay the bonds off a little early, the better they do in the beginning, the less time that, the bonds might not last 20 years. And so we have an agreement where in year 13, only 90% of the revenue goes toward the bonds. The UG starts receiving 10%. Same thing in 2024, it goes down by 10% through 2030. But we may get to a point where the bonds are actually paid off earlier than that, and the UG could be receiving 100% sooner than that.
All right, so the vendors that we have there include, well, in project area 1, we have the Hanger Prosthesis, which is the current vendor there, IHOP, PETA Pit, and the Respiratory Health. So, and that's 100% built out in that area. It's 70-unit physical therapy facility at 19,000 or 20,000 square feet of mixed-use commercial retail. So, the second project area is an 84-room hotel and 9,000 square feet of commercial retail, which includes the Holiday Inn, Five Guys, the 7-Eleven, which unfortunately closed a few months ago, Topped Pizza, and Subway. So all of these are facilities, the hotel and restaurants and retail activities that are there to help and support the KU Medical Center and that community in that area. We do, and so the community resources have been improved. There's better amenities, and the private investment has been achieved. So there's still project area 3 and 4 that have not been pursued, but there are some discussions about those, so those are ongoing. This is a relatively young TIF, and so you know, it's still ongoing. And finally, the tax base was strengthened and diversified. You can see the base was $717,000. It's now $7.2 million, so it improved by $6.5 million with this project.
All right. Our last residential district is Strawberry Hill, and this was a partnership between two different community development organizations that was located in an enterprise zone. There were two project areas. It's been partially built. Only property tax has been pledged. This was created in 2006. The plan was approved in 2007. And so it's located on 6th Street is on the west, Ann Avenue is on the south, Armstrong is on the north, and then 4th is on the east. And we're anticipating completion in 2026. Revenue has been covering the cost of the debt service, and we are anticipating it could, we've got a 2% inflation factor on here, and so it's either going to just pay off or there might be a little bit of a surplus or, so Area A, 11 homes have been constructed, which is about 37%, so 11 homes out of the 30. And then project area B, nothing has occurred on it yet. And so we have an increase in assessed value from $166,000 to $337,000.
All right, so the last TIF and the most recent TIF we have is Metropolitan Avenue. It's a commercial development built in an enterprise zone. There are two project areas. One is fully built out and the other one's partially built. And it's backed by property tax and sales tax. And it is located off Metropolitan Avenue on the south and 24th Street on the west. The district was formed in 2011, and the plans were approved in Project Area 1 in 2012, and then Project Area 2 in 2013. Here's the layout of those project areas. This is some pictures of the development. There's a Save-A-Lot. There's the South Patrol Police Station, and there's Kmart, I think. Oh, Walmart, sorry. And we expect it to be completed in 2031. This project is estimated to pay off on schedule. The revenues are covering expenses. In fact, we are right now estimating that at the end of the term in 2033, that there may be a $2 million surplus. But that's a long time from now. But you know, given our assumptions, that's what we're expecting. So, and that's because that fund balance is expected to grow to $2.7 million at the end of the term, while there still will be some debt service of about $680,000. So it's a net of $2 million. And the private investment was achieved in project area 1, which was the grocery store. There was a 15,000 square foot grocery store there. And then in project area 2, there's the plan was a 41,000 square foot neighborhood market store, a fuel station, and then retail lots. This area, although significantly, most of the project's plans development occurred, 84% of it, but there are still some parcels available that we would like to have developed in order to further improve the success of this, or performance of this TIF. And the tax base has been strengthened. At the beginning, the property assessed value was $56,000, and now it's estimated at 1.8 million. Okay. All right, so that's recaps. This that's all of the TIF districts that we're going to talk about individually. This is a slide that refers to those TIF districts that are active, but we're not going to talk about specifically, and the reason is because they either don't have a project plan, or they're so new that we're still awaiting activity or awaiting finalization of the project plan. I can go through that. The first one is the 38th and Leavenworth, which was formed back in 2004, and that plan just never did move forward. Bethany, 2007, it's a mixed use, and the project plan never materialized. East Parallel is a commercial, and again, there were repeated efforts to, but they failed to draw new interest. Midtown is a project plan, it is a district which has a debt, we have issued debt for, but currently we're still waiting for a project plan to move forward. That was formed in 2004. 57th and State is a commercial property, or a commercial district formed in 2015, and we're waiting on that plan. And then Village West, which is near around 38th and Rainbow, that's a commercial development that was formed only last year, and that's currently under construction right now. Yeah. So to summarize, so we just wanted to kind of quantify how much value was contributed to the entire community as a result of all of these TIFs. So as you can see, the base assessed value for property tax, right, was 3.4 million, and now because of all of these TIFs, our assessed value improved to by $30 million. So that's the increment that we are projecting. So now we have a couple of slides here that provide some chronology or some kind of a performance metrics of all the TIFs. The top row actually is all of those 5 criteria, that checklist that we had in each of these districts, and then along the side there are each of the districts in chronological order. All right, but then if you separate out, continue. If you separate them or resort them based on residential and commercial, then you can see that those red X's that where the performance criteria was not met, for example, revenues aren't covering expenses or the payoff is not on schedule, those are mainly happening in the residential area. In fact, the only one where the payoff is not on schedule is Melrose, so for commercial property. So this is a very, well, this really does illustrate how the use of TIF as an incentive tool for residential development is probably, you know, maybe there's a better way of doing that. So. All right, so now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to review the tax abatement policy, which was adopted back in 2014, and I'm going to pass this over to our interim economic development director, John Stevens.
Thank you. I believe it's important to cover a little bit of the policy and the directives that the staff adheres to as you look at this very comprehensive report and summation of the performance of the TIF districts. So with that, tax increment financing is actually a development tool that is enabled by state statute. And within that state statute requirement, we have several, well, actually, that didn't come in. So I want to cover a little bit as to what that state statute covers. It's a 20-year, maximum of 20-year term. It covers land acquisition, relocation, public improvements, site prep, and utilities and sanitary storm. among other things. So then what does the staff adhere to related to that rather broad state statute requirement? So in a little more detail, the economic development staff and the team will really look at policy directives driven around feasibility studies with our finance department and others to measure the projected performance prior to entering into a TIF agreement. We want to look at the bonding options, specifically starting with a focus on, is pay-as-you-go feasible to make the project work? Because obviously that is the least risky and the least and provides the best opportunity for performance. If that is feasible, then we move that direction. And if not, then we do look at the other performance measures. Then we look at what we're going to do with the performance related to the project plan, making sure that conditions are met prior to approval of the project plan. We want to work at all times to minimize the project investment from property and sales tax and institute a sunset provision so that once the district is approved, if it does not move to plan approval, we can move forward in a more constructive way. We do focus on segregating and quantifying the dollar amount used for public infrastructure improvements. And then we do really want to adhere to a separate criteria for developers who have had a failed TIF, is probably the best term related to it, and how we evaluate future projects that they bring forward. Then finally, I think it's important for projects that have failed to perform at one level or another, what are some of the recourse options that we can consider? One, we could restart the TIF, take a different approach that way. We could look at policy adjustments. We can refinance the debt, and then we could terminate. We could do termination recommendations. Then within the development agreements, we have some tools there that could put some provisions in there for non-compliance actions against the developer. Or we can modify the project plan, as you saw in a couple of these, about taking an area out or adding an area in to make it perform better. And then finally, we have the option to take the property or part of the development area. And with that, I believe we're concluded, and we are now available for questions.
Commissioner Kane and then Commissioner Townsend.
Did Indian Springs have a TIF on it?
Yes, that's the one that's referenced as Midtown.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Townsend.
Thank
That
you.
question? His question was Indian Springs listed, and it was listed as Midtown.
Okay. Why was it listed Midtown and not Indian Springs?
Because it encompasses a little bit more area than just Indian Spring.
Well, illegally, the district is called Midtown.
We just call them out by their TIF name.
Yeah.
We go through and call it that way.
We try to keep from inflaming the public.
Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon. Looking specifically at Peregrine Falcon, just from a historical perspective, I wanted some information about that. I remember receiving as a resident in an area near the desired TIF, 97 and 2005, and unfortunately a couple of things happened that you mentioned already, the lawsuit that affected a lot of properties in Northeast End, and then the recession that hit a lot of people. What was that TIF developer initiated? Was it city initiated? How did that really come to be? That's question number one.
So when researching this, I didn't see where it specifically said that whether it was developer or city
Can
initiated.
you please speak directly into the microphone?
Oh, very sorry.
You have to turn it on.
Oh, there you go. All right. When researching this, because it was back from 1997, there wasn't a lot to say whether it was developer or city initiated, so that's a known.
It was city initiated.
It was
Okay, city.
We didn't have a developer.
You turn your microphone on.
We didn't have a developer until we found, excuse me, Mayor, I'm sorry. We didn't have a developer until, what's his name?
Hughes, Mr. Hughes?
Bob Hughes took on the responsibility of doing it.
Okay.
And it was an attempt to stimulate residential development on that particular area. I believe Commissioner Barnes was somewhat of the driving force behind that at the time. But there were others that thought it was a good location for a project.
And I still think it was. I just, not being here, I knew there was enough history around this table to get there. So thank you.
Somebody too old,
No.
some old geezer that's been around forever.
No.
About that old geezer stuff.
That's not old, that's seasoning, that's knowledge. Thank you. Historical, corporate knowledge. Thank you, Commissioner.
You're welcome.
Okay, next question. There was reference made to the method of financing then, when the TIF was formed, that there hasn't been a change to that. Would you go back to that quickly, and then I think make reference to what options are in case somebody sees this and says, well, let's go back and see maybe what we can do with this. What's the difference in the financing options then and now?
Which district are you referring?
Peregrine Falcon.
Oh, to Peregrine. I'm not sure.
I know we said we're not financing residential TIFs in the same way. The change in policy that's happened within the last couple of years. So if someone wanted to step in and revitalize, it's still, I guess, alive until 2025. What are the financing options?
So so tax increment financing is dependent on whether the development improves sufficiently so that the tax revenue can meet the debt service costs. And generally speaking, we have found, and not only in this city but in other communities, it's typically not the best tool for residential development because some of that property tax or the assessed value doesn't grow quick enough in order to offset debt service or the principal and the interest payment. So the public financial assistance needs to be greater in order to facilitate those residential developments. So there are other tools that are available that, but tax increment financing is probably not the best tool to do it. So I'm not saying that no residential development, I'm just saying this specific incentive tool is probably not the best. There are others that we could explore.
Okay, and the way I'm understanding that is since this is already created, that might not be where we'd want to go in the future if we were starting fresh.
That's what I was saying.
But my question really is methodology in case someone wanted to jumpstart this project. The TIF is already in existence.
All right.
So what are the financing methodologies available? Or we could use the same ones?
If we definitely could have additional residential homes built in that area, it certainly would improve the assessed value, absolutely. The fact is there's only 5 homes there when there's many more that were planned. And so, a certain number of, the infrastructure was in place for the greater number of homes. So there was a big investment made and the payoff, because the plan wasn't met. That's why it's upside down right now.
Okay, I understand that.
Yeah.
And I think a couple of years ago, we made a modification to the NRA plan for recognizing, and if you look at this, most our residential failed TIFs date back pre-2005. So we haven't done any residential TIFs really for a long time. But we looked back at that and said, in order to assist these, if we were to allow NRA to take place within the TIF district, recognizing that the TIF district wouldn't get any money from it for a period, I think we modified the NRA policy to say that if you're in area 1 or A, whatever it is, you can do an NRA for 5 years. Yeah, so
Correct.
that was kind of an effort to say, because all the infrastructure's in place like in this area. So the effort from TIF is to put infrastructure in the ground, it was to demo out things, put in streets, sewers, so all the infrastructure's in place. And then if we could offer incentives back into those areas to say you get property tax, 95% abatement for 5 years, maybe that could help it. And we put that in play. It hasn't made an impact on this subdivision. I think, I'm not sure if it really has made much of an impact on any of these, but that was one of our efforts to try to do things to take advantage of already invested TIF dollars to see if we could stimulate some other investment.
Okay, so that option is still there.
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. Last thing on your summary, I guess it's like about 109, where you do the chronological order. When you analyze each of these TIFs and you look at the column that says improve community resources, amenities, in your handout, it would be, I guess, 109, 110, most pages. And you've got, what does the NA mean? That notation there. You see where it says community?
I think it's just intended to be not applicable for that project area. Now, I'm not sure
Yeah.
on Peregrine Falcon.
Yeah, well, what it means is that it was partially achieved. It's not necessarily wasn't achieved or was achieved. So that's those that had a kind of a slash in them.
Well, it looked like NA not achieved, but I would accept a PA partially achieved because it certainly improved the community and it was a great improvement over what was there and continues to be. So I would take issue with that and want to know what it was.
And that's fair, yeah. We're happy to get any kind of feedback. Some of these criterias, whether they are achieved or not, can be a little bit subjective.
Not all of them, but I mean, if that says improved community, it did that. The housing stock greatly improved in the look as you go from Quindaro, it's off of Quindaro north by several blocks to the fabulous Fairfax district. It was an improvement, isn't that right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, thank you.
Commissioner Bynum.
Thank you. I appreciate the excellent presentation, and about halfway through it, I was sorry that I wasn't tallying the dollar figures to the plus or minus side of each of the 19 TIF areas that you walked us through. And it's clear that from the presentation that residential in our community is performing not so well. Commercial does well. That's been the experience for this community. But given that we do have 19 total, and they are both residential and commercial, so what I was left wanting when it was all over was, given all of that, where are we dollar-wise? Are we to the plus side or the minus side of the balance sheet when we factor all of it in together? At this point in time, I should say, or at the projected end of each area.
So that the second to the last, or towards the end, there was the assessed value. That slide,
yes,
demonstrated that approximately 30 million in additional assessed value was added to.
Yes.
Is your question, though, more pertaining to bonds?
Right. I mean, at each project level, we were shown whether that project at its conclusion was going to end in a surplus or a deficit. And I wish I had been tracking those numbers throughout the 19 parcels where we were talking about a TIF, and how do those numbers add up and factor out in the end is kind of what I was left wanting after all of it.
I think it would be helpful to have slide 109 have 2 additional columns. One to the left with the date that it was initiated. This is 110, actually. I was looking at 109. And one to the right, which is projected net revenue or loss on it. Now, we should know Indian Springs alone is almost $20 million upside down. So you have to almost do everything and then Indian Springs, because it's a very unique piece that we're working hard to get a redevelopment on to get it paid back. But the rest of them, I think we could do that and show a net positive in terms of the bonds. That would be easy to add, I think.
Yeah, I think the only thing that makes that confusing is that some don't have bonds.
Go to the next one.
So they're paying to the positive. Because we did TIF, but we didn't issue bonds. So if you just did the ones with bonds, you're actually isolating ones that are probably more difficult to begin with.
Okay.
So when you're evaluating the whole tool, you can look at it and say, here's our bond ones, pay positive, negative, and then you say, here's all our other ones we did pay as you go, because we said you don't need bonds, but there's going to be a positive, there's going to be a positive on all of those. There is no possibility for a negative.
Yeah.
That's right. So,
So,
if
and
there's
that's a harder number to get, but
I'd like to add also that, okay, if you, I have the numbers right here. So in the first column there, all the red marks, the first one is Peregrine Falcon, that's a negative 788,000. The second one's Mission Cliff 2, that's a negative 2.3 million. And then St. Peter's Waterway was a negative 3.5 million. All the others are positive. So that's where that is. Yeah.
that's right.
so we'll put those numbers to it and send it out to you.
Yeah, if you could send that out to us, I think that'd be helpful. Commissioner Walker,
On the 108,
can you turn your microphone on, please, sir?
on page 108, I want to get a understanding of, this 30 million is a moment, is it not a moment in time? So that number, 30 million, is going to change. Ideally, it would go up, but these commercial properties that are also well-performing, has it not been our experience that as time has gone on, the value of a commercial Chick-fil-A building, for example, it doesn't usually increase in value. It usually diminishes in value as the building ages. Is that not true? So when we're projecting that we're $27 million to the good at this moment in time that you've captured on page 108 or graph 108, are we to believe that when these pay off, they're all going to still continue to have a annually increasing taxable value? Or is it not true that these commercial buildings, by the time they go on the tax roll, they're really not anywhere close to being worth what they were when they were newly built?
I can take a stab at that, maybe. I don't know that they could, I mean, you're speculating a little bit, and it probably varies between the type of development that you have. While we know residential value is not being real good from a TIF perspective, most of us can look at homes, as long as you keep it up, they will increase in value over time.
A few percent a year.
The industrial buildings really hold pretty good. You know, there's some big box arguments to come into play, but, you know, we can look at General Motors as a project that went out there for 20 years and now comes in as one of our largest taxpayers, and that's on property tax alone. So, you know, when you look back at many of the old TIFs that are IRBs that are no longer on, I think from an industrial perspective, those are usually pretty solid. Commercial retail may be a little harder to value, and I don't know. I mean, there's, because I'll agree, 20 years into a project, a store doesn't have that shiny new feel to it, and 20 years later, they need something to come to it, which is one reason, like at 39th and Rainbow, we started tearing it down at 10 years. You know, we didn't give them 20 years of property tax. We said, you're going to start coming down because 20 years into the game, you're going to need to refresh your whole shops and stores. So it's a 20-year TIF, but it's not 20 years of money that our community starts gaining 10 years into it. Same thing at Plaza Speedway, locked at 10 years on any type of property tax that went into that program. and then how the sales tax flowed. So I would agree with your statement on retail.
Well, I think it's, by the time we take up this subject, I'm told we're going to, at the strategic retreat, I think I'd like to have some analysis of that, because one of the things that troubles me about tax increment financing has always been that there is no guarantee when they go online paying full taxes that there is a specific amount or a payment in lieu of taxes that they cannot go below. Taxes can be higher, but no less than. Now, I don't know if that is legally permissible, but, you know, a 20-year-old hotel is a 20-year-old hotel, and unless the owner, you know, renovates it and puts, you know, state-of-the-art stuff in it, you know, we've all probably stayed in 20-year-old hotels, and they do not have the value. Well, the mayor hasn't, but I have, and I just.
I'm sure it's horrible, Commissioner.
I just, it is, but you know, you are able to live through it. You carry bug spray with you. And, anyway, I don't want to be, you know, I just, you know, I want to look at this policy because I think we don't always negotiate, you know, as hard as we could. At 39th and Rainbow, we sent back because they didn't want it, they wanted 100% for the whole 20 years. Now, I'd have liked to gotten more than we got, but we got better than we were getting from them up front. And I think perhaps in some of these TIF deals, you know, we're just a little too generous, and I want to be proven wrong, so plan on proving me wrong, and I just think we are, you know.
One of the things I want to point out is there's really two eras. There's pre-recession and post-recession. From 1997 to 2007, we approved 15 TIFs. From 1997 to 2007, 15 of these TIFs were approved, including all six of the residential ones that are the most challenged. Since 2007, post-recession, we've only approved 4. We've approved 39th and Rainbow, Metropolitan Avenue, 57th and State, which does not have a project plan on it. It's simply been approved, and Rainbow Village in 2016. So in the first 10 years, there were 15 of them, a lot of enthusiasm for TIF. In the last 10 years, only 4. A lot more caution, commercial only, and you start to see the ratcheted down things that you're talking about, Mr. Walker, of not giving up necessarily giving up everything, but thinking about just what's needed to make the project go. So pre-recession, very aggressive, 15 different TIF districts formed. In the last 10 years since 2007, we've only done 4. And I think we learned our lesson on single-family residential. Now, the Strawberry Hill one is townhomes, so it's a little different, and it penciled. But in terms of single-family, boy, the risk of doing a TIF is not worth it. And I think we've learned that from the previous 10 years. So we've been very conservative with this in the last 10 years. I hope we continue to be conservative with it. I hope we continue to negotiate strongly and only give away what's necessary for the project to work, and to make sure the benefit outweighs the cost to the community. So this commission has inherited 10 years of a different TIF policy than we've had the last 10 years. So I think we're on the right track. I like having it in our tool belt. I think it is a tool worth having, and there are areas where it works, but we just need to be thoughtful about it. Yeah, Commissioner Philbrook.
Okay, so for the future, I would like to be a little bit more enlightened about a couple of things. When we talk about the school 20 mills, you know, how that figures in. Of course, they don't get 20 mills right now, and it says it's, I don't know how that figures in, okay, and I just want to understand a little bit more about that. And then the other thing is I also want to know why we are only using the top 2 of all the eligible areas for TIF monies. Because you've got all these other things, major tourism areas, all this other, but we're only using the top 2 for TIF. And so I just kind of want to understand that. That's all. And we can address that in our.
I mean, I could speak to that last question a little bit in the sense that it really comes to play of need. You know, what's our drive to kind of come into this? I mean, bioscience development areas, we may be able to get something like that in the future. I think that was specifically put into place when they were looking at the agri-science, bioscience areas like in Manhattan, Kansas. So there were some specific additions. We've looked at the conservation areas a couple of times. However, we found it, for that same TIF area, we found it easier to do the blighted area. So it really breaks it down when you're working with a developer to say, which one of these do you want to go with, you know? And
so
conservation may sound better than blighted. Conservation a lot of times is, you know, it's just criteria you have to go through and meet for different thresholds in order to enact it. The major tourism area, we actually do that one. They just doesn't reference to these when you look at the STAR areas. And I'm pretty sure that's where that applies over the STAR districts, because those are.
Because that's not part of this respect.
And STAR is a TIF. It's kind of a super TIF, but its basis is in with the TIF tools. That's why when Kathleen said we're not reporting on them, it's a different animal a little bit, so we didn't want to confuse it in with the rest of these.
Okay. Well, so in other words, we're not anti those, it's just we don't necessarily use those.
Right. You go through and you evaluate and like the mayor just said, you know, we've only done 4 of these over the last decade, so it's not like we're out there working TIFs all the time to come into it. When you have the right kind of project for it, you look for the right way to fit it into these. And the enterprise zones has worked well for us too, because that's in a lot of the, you know, more challenged areas that were identified back through this federal formula that was put out at that time.
Okay. All right, thanks. Appreciate that comment.
I would also just, my 2 cents worth. I really like STAR bonds, and anytime we can use STAR bonds, we should. When we do a TIF district, it's 100% local revenue. When we do a STAR bond, it's 60% state revenue. And as I've told the governor many times, I much prefer to spend state revenue than local revenue. And so if there's an opportunity to use sales tax revenue bonds and STAR bonds, we should jump on it. If we could get them in town, if there were areas to bring those east of 635, they are a super powerful tool. The challenge is the restrictions that are on them make it work better out in the western area, which is why it's custom made for the western area by the state. So it's more challenging to bring them in town. But anytime we could use STAR bonds, we should use them, because the spend from the local side is only 1/3, and it's much better. So that's my 2 cents on STAR bond versus TIF. Anything else on this TIF, questions or comments? Commissioner Murguia.
Thanks. I just had a question about the way the slides and the money and information was presented. And I don't completely understand TIF, but is it fair to say that this is for people that don't do this kind of work every day, that are watching or paying attention? Would it be fair to say that TIF is money that is loaned to a development that is paid back over time? Did you say that?
In the case of a bond?
Yes. Okay. So.
And this chart that's right up there on the board kind of illustrates that, Commissioner, in the sense that you got a base of all these projects that was 3.4 million. there's $27 million that our community wouldn't have generated otherwise, but for this TIF project coming about.
No, I think it's,
That's money that goes back in that over time starts to get generated and pays back into it.
no, I think this is a great presentation, and I understand it. I was just saying for the general public's information, if you look at one specific deal on here, whatever the deal is, 39 Rainbow or Metropolitan Avenue, and you look at how much money the government loaned that deal, okay, then say it's $2 million, and then the date on here projects when that is supposed to be paid off, okay? What I would be interested in seeing is how much money was loaned, what the date was that it was expected to be paid back, and where we are currently. I think this lends itself a little bit to what Commissioner Walker is saying. We've touted for a long time that the STAR bonds out west were paid off, was it 3 years early?
5 years early? 5 years early.
And I think that's great. I think what I'd like to see is, are any of these individual deals based on the revenue they're bringing in currently slated to be paid off early? So the one that obviously draws my attention is the Walmart in Argentine. You say it's slated to be paid off in 2033. I think that's what your slide says. Is that right? Am I reading that correctly?
2033 was when the plan ends, but 2031 was our projection.
Okay. In 2031, that's when it's scheduled to be paid off. But if you look at, the project has over a $2 million surplus. So am I reading this wrong in saying that it appears to me that this project is on the track to be paid off way before 2031? Is that accurate?
Yeah, and you want to answer? Well, I know. So, yeah, so the answer to that is yes. But from a mechanism, we're not actually able to pay it off because there's a general fund obligation. It's a general obligation bonds, and it just doesn't have that kind of redemption provision in the bonds.
Right. So that's where I was getting to what Commissioner Walker was saying. Why is it that we can't structure a deal where we can pay those general obligation bonds off early?
The reason we can't pay it off early is because that was one project in a full series of bonds. We may have bonded 30 projects in that one issue. So we can't pull out one project out of the bond issue and pay it off early. We can collect we're tracking the collection of the revenues, and so we will know when it pays off early, but we'll have to continue along with the debt schedule until the debt service payments end.
By the way, if it's not a general obligation bond, then we could pay it off early. It's just that this one is, so we can't.
So when you bundle these, what would you say, bonds? When you bundle these bonds for all these different projects together, one project or two projects could be carrying the debt load for other less performing projects, correct? Because it seems to me that what you're doing is, if you look at it in terms of property, if I own 5 homes and I borrow money on all 5 homes, and I have one loan for all 5 homes, the individual projects, the individual homes may be all performing differently. But as long as there's enough revenue coming in from the bundle of projects, then you have enough money to pay that bond issuance, correct?
Commissioner, it's kind of the nature of the GO bond. You know, we do those every year, and I think that's where you're trying to take the GO project and put it over here to our special revenues where we isolate, and it's a project by itself and it has its own performance. I mean, every year when we bring a big old mass of, here's all our GEO projects, and this is being backed by the full faith and credit of the unified government and all the revenue streams we have. So all our tax dollars. So then we're taking from everything that's coming into our revenues, and every year then, so now the money for everything that's paying into a GEO bond like the Metropolitan, that's going into just our pot of money that we now have to take and put over here toward how we're going to pay off everything each year. And some of it goes to debt finance, some of it goes to operating, and you split it out and you break out your tips. So it's the good thing about it for the project is that's why finance companies like it. They get a low interest rate when we say we're putting GEO behind it. You know, what our last GEO bonds go out at? 4%,
4.1,
something like that, versus
5
6
or
or 7% on the open market. So it, once we do that, we kind of separate it from the project, but then on the separate ledger, we track how they're all doing and keep tracking.
But
Well,
If it doesn't make money, like Indian Springs not putting any money into the pot, but it's all part of the big mess of bonds that we issued out a decade ago whenever we did all that.
But the other important thing is the GEO bonds, we're issuing GEO bonds for building improvements, for streets, for sewers, for all kinds of things. And it's not that we bundle our economic development GEO bonds separately. We just do a tranche of GEO bonds. It's going to have this much economic development, this much streets, this much building, this much of sewers. And so it all goes out in one tranche, and then we finance it over X number of years. So any one of those could be paid off sooner, but the tranche can't be paid off unless we do a comprehensive refinancing measure, which our finance team brings to us every couple of years. They bring a refinance to us where we buy down a whole tranche of bonds and refinance them to lower the interest rate and save us money over time. So that's the important piece, is there's no way to separate out any of these, because once we go GEO, it's just a big bucket of bonds that we need for all kinds of things.
So star bonds, then they can be paid off early, correct?
Yes,
Correct.
that's right.
Depending on the way they're issued. And that's another good example, but you can. When you go out and do it, you can do what's the terminology? I can't think.
Early redemption.
Super sync.
Well, super sync.
Or early redemption, and that's how we did the ones for the Village West area. The difference is one like we did for the Kansas Speedway, which our first star bonds were issued. Those were issued out of over their 20-year period with no super sinker clause within it. However, there is a clause within it that says once you fill up all your funds that say you'd have to fall off so many years and not pay it, then you can start receiving money. So that's why we do get, what, $700,000 in sales tax from the Speedway every year now or something like that, because we filled all the buckets there that say, well, if they don't have a race next year, we still got enough money in reserve to pay it. And that's why we're getting money from that one early, but the bonds aren't paid off.
We also did not issue general
It'll
obligation
be
bonds.
For 20 years, and it's different ways of selling bonds. Some people buy a bond and say, I want a steady repayment flow for 20 years, and that's how I want to buy it. Others will buy that bond and say, okay, good, and if I can get paid off in 10 years, fine. But I know that way I get my money back.
But Mr. Bach, it's also true, we didn't issue general obligation bonds with star bonds.
No.
So that's another issue. With the star bonds, we only went out to the private sector to sell those. We never did general
That's
obligation.
correct. Those bonds were always relying upon the revenues coming from those areas. If, say, the Speedway or
Well,
Village West area did not produce, well, Speedway might have some exceptions.
annual appropriation.
Village West area didn't produce, we weren't on the hook for those massive amount of bonds.
So it sounds like you already have this then. All I'd like to see is on these projects, is if this is too difficult, it's not necessarily that important, but I'm curious to, on each one of these projects, how much government money was invested in each one of them, what the projected date payoff was, which you've listed in here, and where we're at today with paying that off on each one of these individual projects. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, we can provide that. Happy to.
You have, I figured you probably had that. So this is helpful, but it's also nice to know, we kind of made a broad brush statement when we said, looking at TIF, using TIF as an incentive for residential is not necessarily a good idea because they haven't panned out. I don't know that that's really the case. It might just be where we're doing those residential TIFs and the volume of homes that we're building, the number of homes that we're building. So I agree that the way we've been doing it, it hasn't been performing, and I think that we obviously have to take note of that. But I also think that doing infill residential TIF projects is incredibly difficult. I've been saying that for years, that that's not really in our best financial interest. But if you had a parcel of ground that was separated from not infill, I could see how building a community in an area like that, the valuations would be higher and a residential TIF would be beneficial.
I could see, and maybe there's, because it's a good discussion you could get into on the biggest failure point that comes with the residential TIF is you look at it and say, hey, we're going to build, take a number, 50 houses. Well, if like a commercial development, you know, like Walmart, you can say, I'm going to build a Walmart. Boom, you know that building's built. You don't come out and build 50 houses right off the bat.
Right.
Go to a poppin' subdivision that's really working great. They're going to build a house. They might build 3 or 4 at the same time, but they don't build 50 right off the bat. And it takes a lot of crews to get there. I went back and looked at these because I wasn't working over these back when we did some of these residential TIFs. So I looked back and kind of did that analysis on them, or looked at the analysis with Charles back years ago, and we were noted that most of the performance were done based on a complete build out like Waterway in 2 years.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, when you think Waterway, it's 70 houses. That's not bad.
Right.
But it was performed, so it would do 120 houses in 2 years.
Right.
Well, that's impractical. So it's kind of looking at something like that and saying, what's the right way to perform it? A pay-as-you-go TIF is a different way to think about how to do a residential. So then the developer could take advantage of it, but we put them on the hook to say, you want to get the TIF money, you build the house.
Right.
Then we'll give you the revenue that comes from it.
And then if you do a mixed use, you know, you've got higher density, it's good for infill.
Right.
Then you bring in those multiple revenue sources, you know, the revenue, the retail.
That's exactly.
That helps.
Residential TIF.
Yeah.
Is it had the apartment complex that built up, paid off the big chunk, and the other portions didn't really do that well, but it took out the bigger part of the infrastructure cost.
Right, that's exactly what I was trying to get at, that it's really not fair to compare residential TIF with a commercial TIF, because it'd be like saying I'm going to build 2,000 square feet of a 15,000 square foot commercial building first, and let's see how that goes. Well, it's not going to go well. So that's the difference in my. So I just wanted to make sure we were thinking that through, that the pay-as-you-go sounds like it's a better option.
Let's do this. We do need to end because we need to switch cameras to go downstairs at 7 o'clock. If you have other questions or comments about this, let this percolate for a while. If you have other questions that you want, get those over to Mr. Bach so that he can get those answered for us. And any answer that we get, if you could send that to all the commissioners just to make sure that, because someone might ask a question I hadn't thought of, and then we can all see those. But if there's a desire to do more with TIF analysis or economic, and as we work on economic development tools, we can schedule additional special sessions, or we can push it into the Economic Development Standing Committee and let that group work on it as well. So thank you all for doing this. This is a great presentation, very thorough, and appreciate your pulling it all together. This meeting is adjourned, and we'll be at 7 o'clock downstairs.